Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the third episode of Deconstructing. This month, community manager Megan Everett sits down with audio director George Spanos and sound designer Eric Preston to talk about the process of sound production and design in Warframe. So wherever you are, grab some coffee, sit back, and enjoy.
Hello and welcome back to the Deconstructing podcast. I am your host, Megan Everett, and I am joined by...
George Spanos, audio director on Warframe, and I've been at DE for 1,300 years. No, 13 years.
Wow. My name's Eric Preston, senior sound designer for Warframe, and I've been here for over 4 years.
Can you do that in your Batman voice?
I'm Batman. 4 years, Warframe, Eric Preston.
Do that backwards.
Sound designer, senior.
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 Not a junior.
Sound designer, senior.
Yeah, I'm old.
All right, so
old.
13 years, 4 years, 4
Right.
plus, 13 plus. What were you doing before working at DE?
Well, I worked in the advertising industry for about 7 years, doing post-production work. So I would record voiceovers, I would mix television, radio commercials, I would do some sound design. I did some short film, I did some albums, I did a little bit of everything before joining DE.
Similar to George, I was in TV and film for 10 years. Sound design, recording voiceovers, mixing, and doing some music here and there.
Is there anything that sticks out during that time as a good memory?
Yeah, one of the things that stuck out for me was the first film that I got to work on, which was Saw 7.
You worked on Saw 7?
Saw 7. Yeah, that was fun. So it was the first time I got to work on like a big-ish kind of movie. But yeah, all along the way there was great memories of meeting people and working with different types, voiceovers and directors and producers. And
I'm going to presume that it was like gory sounds you were working on for Saw?
yeah, gory sounds and screams and
God.
you get used to it after a while.
I am desensitized.
Yeah, it just all turns into tomatoes and carrots cracking and stuff. So.
It was the vegetable route you took to the...
Always the vegetables.
Always you don't do a pudding or choking yourself in
Oh,
the
yeah,
garage
pudding's
like
great.
George.
There's some pudding.
I do the choking thing.
That's gonna be
In
the
a good
tagline.
way. That's going to be edited
In a good way. No,
in a good way.
stop that.
Yeah.
Stop.
The first show that I ever worked on, I was an assistant sound effects editor for Must Be Santa.
Oh, wow.
So that's my claim to fame. It was a CBC special.
That's amazing.
Must Be Santa. Yeah.
That's a lot more joyous.
It was very joyous than
Is it
Saw
a
7.
kids show, movie?
Yeah, it was like a kids thing with, I don't even remember the premise, but she had to find Santa or something. It was a long time ago.
Yeah?
Yeah, this was last century type of thing.
Last century. You're a dinosaur.
I'm a dinosaur.
So your first day or week here at DE, what sound do you remember working on that was your first for Warframe? If you can remember that far back, George.
Well, yeah, I know. Well, when I first started here at DE, we weren't working on Warframe.
That's right.
We were
True.
working on Dark Sector, and one of the sounds on Dark Sector that I remember having the hardest, that took me forever to make, was the sound. If any of you have played that game, Hayden was the main character in it, and he threw a thing called the Glaive, which is what we have in Warframe now. But this is OG Glaive. So, and I remember I tried a whole bunch of different sounds for it, like what would make the sound of blades spinning in the air, and I tried like knives and kind of just editing them and cutting them up close to each other so that they sounded like they were swishing through the air. That didn't really work. I tried a whole bunch of other things, and then the thing that ended up working for it, funny enough, I had these little bowls, these little metallic kind of, they're called singing bowls, or like Tibetan bowls.
Oh, is that where you like rub the inside of
Yeah,
it?
you can rub the inside of it,
Yeah.
and it makes like a note, and it's used for meditation and that kind of thing. But what I did with it was I spun it on a wood surface, and so it made this with a bit of a metallic sound to it. And that's the story of how I came to across the Glaive sound. And that's one of my earliest memories from DE was having the challenge of doing that, and then and then coming up with that. So yeah, that was
mining for a jewel.
Yeah, well, and that's sound design, right? Like, it's like you gotta chip away at things to kind of uncover the true essence of it. And sometimes where you start you don't end in that same place. So yeah, so that was one of my earliest memories.
Absolutely. One of the first sounds that I did, I remember when I got here, was probably about a month in. And I apologize for anyone who liked the original sounds, but it was the power-ups.
Oh.
The energy and the health power-ups that I ended up...
Like the pickups. Like
Right.
Pickups,
Yeah.
that I ended up redoing. And that was an interesting challenge. That was the first sound that I ever made for video games. So if you listen closely, there's still some of the original stuff peppered in there. But that was the first thing that I cut my teeth on here.
Do you remember your first sound that was outside of computer sounds, like having to do a bowl on a wooden surface?
Yeah, totally. The first sounds outside of that would have been all of the ambient sounds for the Grenier Ocean tile
Very
set.
nice, yeah.
So we actually went to a pool, and we ended up recording horns underwater and splashing.
That's right.
And that was like a day long of just recording these organic sounds in a pool. It was freezing cold. And it was so cold.
One of it was 4 or 5 of us at the time, I think, and one of the other sound designers on the team. We had this like little mixer, like portable hand blender thing, that you'd use to blend in a cup or whatever, and that you'd plug in. And so he's like, "Oh, let me put that in the pool and just see like what the sound of the blade is in the pool." So like, okay, cool. So he does that, and then I noticed that he's plugged into an extension cord, and the extension cord is slowly moving to the edge of the pool.
Oh my God.
And I'm like, it was one of those moments where I ran and I
Slow
grabbed it. It was
motion,
slow
yeah.
motion, and I pulled it out of the way, and it was like, ooh,
Yeah, that's
too close for comfort on that
Yeah.
one.
bad news.
But the things you do for your craft, right? The things we do for Warframe,
Yeah.
for all the players out there, we put our lives on the line regularly.
Regularly.
Yeah.
So I do have some questions from our actual players. I asked them on Twitter. So they did have a few, so I'm just going to go through them. Someone on Twitter wants to know, how are the spoken languages of each faction created?
Yeah, well, that's an interesting story too, actually. I forget when this happened, probably later part of 2013. The Grenier used to just speak in English, and they kind of had some funny phrases, actually. And I know some of you out there want to bring those back. Maybe we'll do that one day in a special pack. But we wanted to make them sound different and guttural and meaner. And so one of the ways of doing that is to me anyway, as an English speaker, is to have hard-sounding letters and hard-sounding like phrases for the enemies to say. And so what we did was Steve actually developed a script, a Lewis script, where we can type in the sentence that we want the enemy to say. For Grenier, let's say, attack or whatever. And then we can choose certain consonant pairs and vowel pairs to make it sound more guttural. And so we set that all up, and then now you just type your phrase in, you hit enter, and it spits it out in Grenier. And we have a similar one for the corpus. And so they all follow that same kind of language convention. And that's why if you hear some phrases like attack, for example, in Grenier is ataf, if whenever you hear that, it's going to be consistent. Anytime a Grenier says attack, it's going to sound like ataf. And so actually, an interesting story about that is that's how Clem was born.
Get Clem,
Get Clem, because get them, translated into Grenier, is get Clem.
Oh.
And so someone one day heard it and was like, who's this Clem
Data
guy?
Reaper, yeah.
Yeah.
Data Reaper was the one who drew up a comic of this Clem character,
Yeah.
and then he was born.
Yeah, so that was kind of cool actually when that happened. Is like it came from the Grenier language. So yeah,
You can translate it all technically.
yeah.
That's
You have
Technically,
some
and
time
you-
on your hands.
And you can do it in reverse. And I think
Yeah.
some people have done that actually. So I saw a spreadsheet once where someone had figured it out.
Really?
Yeah, someone posted it on Twitter or something at one point.
And then infested is obviously just gargles and
Infested
weird.
is all the Saw 7 sounds.
Yeah.
Don't tell them.
No,
don't
don't
tell
tell
Warner
them.
Brothers. Don't tell them. Whoever that is, sorry. Who else? We have Cetus, which is an English language, which
Yep.
is just voice actors.
Yeah, most of the time now what we do is we get people to speak in English at this point, because that's the other thing too. I think for us, and obviously as English speakers, I think it resonates more with you to hear it in that language, and you know what they're saying. And Warframe has come a long way in story and character development, and so back in the day, it was more about creating a vibe for the enemy NPCs to have. But when you want to tell a story, it helps for it to make sense in that respect. And that's why Vor, again, as a lot of you will remember, Vor used to speak in Grineer, but now he speaks in English, just because it got to be annoying to hear him in transmissions speak. Yeah. Even though you have the translation, I think if it's something that's in the forefront, you kind of it needs to make sense in that respect.
Well,
to
Vor's
somebody.
monologue is one of the most popular memes.
Right.
Have you seen that?
I don't. Which one? The
corrupted Vor, when he talks about like, you come to this place, you think you are pure, or whatever he
Right.
says.
Yeah.
Giant section of his monologue is on like knowyourmeme.com.
Is it really?
It's huge.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Okay.
There was actually I don't know, it might have been you, it might have been someone else, but in this week's update, there'll be a fix for him not saying his monologue, and people were very upset about it. So it got fixed to be added
Thank
back
goodness.
Yeah.
Thank goodness,
Keep the meme alive.
Honestly. All right, so what inspires the theme of the tunes, the lore of the enemy, or the feel of a planet? What are the inspirations behind those?
Yeah, so we look at a lot of the concept art. We look a lot of sort of what the level designers are doing, and we kind of get a feel for what it's, what the tile set's going to be about. Like Orb Valis, for example, it's cold, it's desolate, it's windy, a lot of blue, a lot of gray. For us, that meant electronic and more kind of hard and angular sounds, whereas a lot of the Grineer music in the game is more orchestral. It's a little more kind of not futuristic technology, but current day or older technology kind of a thing. And so that's also what we do with the weapon sounds for any of the factions, is we try to keep it, Corpus stuff is very high tech, and Grineer stuff is more organic and oily and mechanical sounding. And so that kind of feeling and methodology goes behind music and sounds and everything, depending on faction and depending on planet. So yeah, and that's the basic kind of idea behind it.
Yeah, we think through it quite a bit, and we iterate a lot on it as well. Usually the first pass is not what people end up hearing in the final game. So, and it usually evolves as well with the art and the other departments as things happen and things change. We sort of change with it. So yeah, it's like a long process. There's usually lots of discussion.
Yeah, and that's it's always interesting whenever there's a dev stream. And it's like a work in progress. It's always like, oh gosh,
just cringing in the background.
Yeah, what state is that thing in, or whatever? And
because you guys are working on so much, and then it's like, oh, we're going to show this part that's obviously not released yet. And it's like, have I had time to touch that yet, or to work on that?
Yeah, and a lot of the times it's kind of like it's not at the place that you want it to be, right? And so things change. But I think people understand that, and they understand that a work in progress is a work in progress.
6 years in, they better understand that this is a work in progress game.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Part of the charm of it, I think.
Yeah.
I agree, absolutely. Do you guys have a favorite theme of anything, like Orb Valis, or anything like that?
Favorite theme? I love the Grineer.
Yeah.
I really like the Grineer. I think they're just a solid package altogether. The music and the voices and it's just such a solid identity that they have, and such a unique look as well. So yeah, I'm a big fan of all that is Grineer. Yeah,
I was a big fan. I am a big fan of We All Live Together. Actually, the song that Keith wrote. I think for us that was such a big departure, and we were a bit kind of, nervous isn't the right word, but sort of like, when you're trying something new, you're like, is this going to work?
Like apprehensive.
Is this going to be the right thing? And, when he wrote it and we listened to it, we were like, man, this is going to be really cool. And I think for us too, anything that kind of has lyrics behind it really carries weight. And I think that really, there was a first for us, So yeah, that for me is a proud moment, I think. It's something I never get tired of hearing, so.
I remember when we heard his first demo, it was just him on the piano, right?
Yeah.
Ooh,
very
I would love
raw.
to hear that.
We have, yeah,
Oh,
we
that'd
have.
be so cool.
Yeah, and
If Keith will let us,
Yeah.
maybe we can play it.
It was only the first part of the song too.
his like kid was crying in the background.
Perfect.
It's literally the name of it, the file he sent me. When you record, like I guess on the iPhone, it was called home.m4a. You know, it was like just like whatever, just and he must have he set his iPhone down and hit record, and he's like playing on the piano, and he's like, here's a melody. What do you guys think? And we're like, oh man, that's awesome. Let's develop that. Let's make that into something. And then the lyrics kind of just came together for it and kind of worked out really well. And I think that's one of Keith's strengths is matching music to lyrics, which isn't easy to do. Yeah.
And I remember when he sent it was almost, I think it might have been the final version. It was the first time that I'd heard the lift when the arpeggios come in and it takes off from the beginning of the song.
That's my favorite part of it.
And I remember hearing that and like getting insane shivers.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, something's going on here. This is special. It was
Especially
really
if you
cool.
can make like a sound team that hears sounds all the time, work on them, give you guys goosebumps, then you know it's gold.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it
I remember before I'd even heard it, I got a message saying, "You're gonna love it. It's literally like an opening to Frozen, like the Disney movie." And I was like, "I'm sold. I don't even care what it is.
Yeah.
Like, we're turning into Disney, and I'm okay with it."
Yep. Actually, Frozen was one of the kind of like song, that song, the worker song in it was. We looked at that as one of the kind of inspirations for it, and wanting it to feel like that kind of choral kind of piece. So. Yeah.
So you kind of, George, you talked about the glaive being one of the hard sounds that you had to do. Are there any other sounds that you recall, both of you, that were super challenging to do?
It's always the short, small sounds that are the most challenging.
Small.
Like the things that you just...
Like they're really quick. Just
The sounds that you hear over and over and over, and are very short, those are by far the hardest. So like the hit notifications, when you shoot somebody, getting that sound right is extremely difficult because you hear it all the time.
Right.
And even then, right, we put in a toggle so you could turn it off if you don't like it.
It makes my heart every single time you guys have to put in a toggle to turn your sounds off.
Well, it's like, here's a sound that you're going to hear for hours, especially if you play a lot. You're going to hear it for a very long time. Those are always the hardest sounds for me, for sure. They take a long time. And it's because as soon as you hear something on repeat, all of the flaws start to become extremely apparent.
Sure.
So it's like you have to file it down. It's like crumpling up a piece of aluminum and then just rubbing it until it's this smooth ball, this perfectly smooth ball. It takes a long time.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny because like especially if it's something that you need to communicate an idea with, that players need to hear and be aware of, but it can't be annoying. And one thing that I just remembered right now is the shield down and shield up sound, which I think some people probably hate, and
it gives me anxiety, but I like it.
Yeah, but like I think I worked on that for forever to get to that point, and it's such a short sound, right? I mean, it's like they're maybe half a second to a second for each, and I went through so many iterations of it, and I don't know, it's probably still not the best it could be, but it's one of those things that's like, well, how do you communicate to players what's happening, probably during a really intense situation, so there's a lot of other sounds happening. How do you make this sound kind of cut through and let you know what's happening and not be annoying? And so that took a long time to work on and to get, and again, it's a short sound. Aim gliding and bullet jumping, I worked on those, and I worked on those forever. Just simple sounds now that you hear and you're like, whatever, but I tried so many different things for those. It's the sounds that are the shortest that you think are the simplest sounds are actually the hardest. Like creating sounds for Warframes, it's hard work and it's intense, but I think it's on a different level, because it's sort of like once you figure out the sonic palette of a Warframe, you kind of go down that path, but I don't know what it is. There's just something about the shorter, simpler sounds that are harder to make and take the most time.
I remember spending a lot of time on the headshot sounds.
Yeah.
And a lot of time on the kill shot sounds, is the sound that you make when you just kill a guy. Those take forever to do.
Especially because, and correct me if I'm wrong, but different factions have different headshot sounds? Because Corpus, you have the helmet, Grineer.
Well, Corpus and Grineer share the same sound.
They share the same.
But if you do a headshot on like a MOA or you kill a MOA, they're slightly more mechanical than organic. But that's another thing too, is you don't want to make too many variations either, because you're communicating some information. So you want to use a sound that people are going to learn. And if you have too many different ones, then it sort of takes it from, I got a headshot to, was that a headshot? Right. I don't know. So it's that tough balance of like the same sound over and over, but trying not to make it too annoying.
Yeah. Well, and then it becomes almost musical too sometimes, because then you have like, like you're shooting a guy and you're hitting him. You're hitting a metal surface. You don't want it to feel like you're playing a keyboard or whatever, but you want to communicate the idea. But you don't want it to sound repetitive either.
Yes.
So it's a challenge for sure. Yeah.
I'm curious about Wisp, because she has some really interesting sounds. Is there any behind the scenes info on how you did Wisp sounds?
Yeah, Eric's been working on Wisp, and he's
Wisp Man.
Yeah, Wisp Man.
The Wisp is all, well, we did a first iteration that was never heard on live stream. And the first iteration was much more playful and tonal, and it ended up just not fitting and suiting it very well. So we went back to the drawing board, and we went for a more like raw in your face approach with it. So we have this weird blue tube in my office. And if you make sounds into this tube, it makes all these weird whispery effects. So I used a lot of that tube. Actually, most of the sounds that you hear in there are me and doing
the blue tube.
That tube. Yeah. And then of course, you reinforce them with other sound effects, like snuffing out a candle and like matches being lit and little tiny things like that when you feature them or you put them up against some cool effects, they take on a completely different sound than what it actually is. But yeah, a lot of it's the tube, the blue tube.
Yep. And that's the thing too. I think that's an important thing for anyone out there who's starting to do sound design. This is a perfect lesson of like, don't think that you need the most expensive equipment or that you need to layer tons of sounds. Sometimes it's just the simplest things. It's the blue tube, or whatever, because something that it's all about getting the unique sound and something that hopefully we haven't heard before. And those sounds exist all around you, and you just have to kind of open your mind to them and try different things and see what you can make. Some of the best sounds, that's how they're made. The simplest kind of elements go into some of the most interesting sounds.
Absolutely.
And you time stretch it or you pitch shift it or you do whatever to it, and you get something really unique and different that way. Yeah.
Thank you for listening to the Deconstructing Podcast, and thank you very much to George Spanos, Eric Preston. Thank you for joining me today. You guys are amazing, and I'm excited for the new sounds that you put into Warframe.
Yes, we are too.
Blue tube.
Blue tube man.
We're all
Yeah, exactly. I'll insert a clip of the blue tube.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, finito.
Yeah, all right. Thanks, guys.
Right.
That was
fun. Great.
Yeah, that was good.
I learned so much.
Thank you for listening to the third episode of Deconstructing. As a neat little tidbit, just after we recorded this podcast, the sound team won the Webby People's Voice Award for Best Music and Sound Design. Congratulations to the Warframe sound team on their win. Tune in next month for another episode of Deconstructing.